Now, hello everybody, and a very warm welcome to this choice event number 86, Making Scope 3 Our Business, sharing insights from the Climate Transformation Summit 2025. My name is Josepha. I'm the Growth Marketing Lead at Climate Choice, and I'm super thrilled to be your host for today's session. And it's actually very nice to see people then also joining us here again, and a very warm welcome also to everybody who's joining us for a ChoiceEvent for the first time. Because together, what we will be doing is that we will be diving deep into one of the most urgent and high relevance challenges in corporate climate action, namely turning Scope 3 ambition into implementation, and with that, real world impact. And if you haven't heard of Climate Choice before, well, we are a software company supporting both sustainability and procurement teams with our climate intelligence platform, enabling supply-specific Scope 3 data collection at scale so that all of you can concentrate on accelerating measurable decarbonization action along, but then also, most importantly, with your supply chain partners. And because we know that Scope 3 is a team sport, we created this webinar series of choice events to spotlight real-world best practices from companies actively transforming their supply chains today. And additionally, to these choice events, once per year, we also meet in person at the so-called Climate Transformation Summit to do basically the same, but live and in person. And what better way to keep the momentum going after our first sold-out Climate Transformation Summit in Berlin than with this follow-up choice event? And so what we want to do today is that we want to reconnect online to share stories, lessons, and some real-world best practices from some of the standout sessions at CTS 2025, whether you have joined us already there in person or just tuning in right now. Now, on the next slide, you find a little bit of an overview in this CTS at a glance, because this year already marked actually the 6th edition of the Climate Transformation Summit, and it was one of the most impactful ones yet, because we gathered over 100 leaders from procurement, sustainability, and supply chain, hosted a 2-day packed event of workshops, panels, and deep dive, all focused really on turning Scope 3 from theory into business practice. And our motto this year was 5 years to deliver from targets to actions. And we actually really could feel it in the room that it couldn't have been more timely. Because 2025, I mean, most of you then also know it here in that call, marks the midpoint really to the Paris Agreement, but then also to the UN 2030 agenda. And this means that we have just 5 years left to really deliver on the climate targets that so many of us have set. Or, of course, we then also risk falling short of the commitments made to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. And at the same time, we all fear that we are navigating a very accelerating or growing uncertainty. So political headwinds on the one side, regulatory shifts that are currently going on. I guess that we are all in some sort of the same LinkedIn bubble. So there's ESG backlash news everywhere, economic pressure on the other side on the news every day. But amidst all this, one thing has become very clear for me, and I guess many others who joined us at CTS 2025, and it's that this really now is not the time to scale back on climate action, but it's actually the time to scale smart. And this is exactly where Scope 3 comes in, because supply chain emissions in the end aren't just a reporting category. They are really the business battleground where climate ambition becomes action, and where this action then also becomes or turns into resilience, innovation, and competitiveness. And this is also what you see exactly reflected on the next slide, because the sheer diversity of our ecosystem partners, so from sponsors and speakers to workshop hosts and participants, really shows how broad and cross-functional and important this transformation really is. Because Scope 3 is no longer just a sustainability topic. It's really where procurement, finance, strategy, and operations meet, all stepping up to shape the future of climate smart supply chains. And it's exactly this collaborative spirit that we explored at the Climate Transformation Summit 2025 that we would like to carry forward into today's sessions at the end of 4 very interesting case studies that you can see on the next slide. And I'm actually very happy that I'm joined today by my dear colleague and Climate Choice co-founder, Lara Obst, who will guide us through the learnings and lessons of today's featured case study. So from O2 Telefónica over TeamViewer, Otruvia, Carl Zeiss. I'm already very much looking forward and keeping the conversation going. But with that also, Lara, I'm super happy to welcome you on our virtual stage of this choice event. And I would love to, yeah, just open it up also asking how you're feeling today, but then also in the context of today's session, how do you feel post CTS 2025?
Yeah, first of all, super happy to be here. And yeah, it's directly 1 month after the summit. And I guess for most of us, May, June was a super busy time. It feels always like closing the first half of the year, and everyone has a lot of events and then a lot of projects that needs to be finalized until the summer break comes in. So I'm happy we had the summit, and it was a really, really busy time. And I'm always a little bit sad that I cannot speak to everyone while doing moderation. So that's also cool today to share like the insights and go in some topics at least a little bit deeper. To have a discussion about it today.
Yeah, nice. And I mean, while we talk about the discussion, I think this is also a cool, yeah, keyword basically to set a reminder also for everybody who is here with us in the audience, because there's actually a Q&A tool that you can use also here in Zoom. And so you find it below in the yeah, in the science bar. I'm not sure what this is actually called, where you can submit your questions at any time, and we will be collecting them throughout the session. And then also we'll take some time in order to address as many of them as we can, either during or at the end of the session. And with that, I would like to keep the information from the beginning as short as it was until now, and hand over the virtual stage to you, Laura.
Yeah, thanks. And yeah, as Josefa said, I always love to hear first from you before I start talking. So, who dares to first use the chat function to maybe just share your name and if you have been joining the summit or not? So maybe just in my case, it would be Lara, I joined, or Peter, I wasn't there, but happy to learn more. So I'm gonna see who dares to be the first person in the chat to see who's in the call today. And I will deal with waiting. So let's have a look. I cannot see it yet. Anyone? Ah, yeah, perfect. Now there's the first one. So Fritz, you were not there. Perfect. So now you see how it works. And thanks, Friedrich and Fritz, that you dared to be the first one. But I feel it's really, really important for me also always that you feel invited of this call to really actively be part of it. And yeah, the second question, I made it a little bit more easy for you. So we have Paul, which I start now. And here you can just easily click anonymously on the questions. It should be popping up on your screen. So the first one is, we're going to talk today about scope 3 as usual. But yeah, I want to learn from you maybe which kind of challenges you are facing in there. Is it creating a holistic strategy? Sorry, I'm talking too much and too quickly. Is it collecting supplier data, so CCF and PCFs? Is it moving to a specific calculation with specific supplier data? Is it bringing carbon into procurement, collaborating with suppliers on real action, or something else? I mean, is a huge range of issues you can have. And then which kind of measure or action do you think is the most actionable or successful one for scope 3 action? So is it creating a business case? Is it the strategy and roadmap? Is it internal alignment? Is it data from suppliers, collaboration with suppliers, or again, other? And here's no right or wrong. You can just choose. And then we see, what are your thoughts about today's topic? So I see some of you already dare to answer, and I'm gonna give you a small time to think about it again. Good, and now I close it, and I should also be able to share the results for you. And yeah, interesting. So biggest challenge, 15% say the strategy, again, 15% the supplier data. Then not so many is moving to specific data, but then 38%, I think that wins, is bringing bringing carbon into procurement. I'm really quick today. And again, 15% say collaboration. So it kind of shows what we also learned over and over again. There are many challenges, all of them are important. And yeah, then bringing carbon into procurement seems to be one of the biggest ones. And then which actions are the most successful ones or most needed? So again, two that win with 27% is creating the business case and internal alignment. And then everything else, yeah, 2 times 18% as well. So robust strategy and supplier data. Yeah, I love that. So you can click it away. At least I need to click it away on my computer. I think it's the same for you. Yes, that very much shows what I wanted to go into, because yeah, talking about scope 3 and specifically scope 3 action is often a topic where we see working with customers that it can be very overwhelming, because the moment you open up supply chain decarbonization as not only a topic that focus on scope 3 calculation, but really action, so moving into bringing it into a holistic sustainability strategy, but then also into a data-driven metrics for procurement, and really going forward also as a foundation for your supplier integration and engagement, then it becomes a very huge story, which is not about just only sourcing to sale to make like a more low carbon impact in your supply chain, but it really becomes the driver for strategic change and for your company's action tool, so to say, to implement the climate strategy and adapt and mitigate also your whole company's journey. And that is what we also in the beginning of the summit really focused on and like opened the stage with, is that it can be, or I think everyone is nowadays very, very much overwhelmed with what's happening in the outside world. We have so many challenges outside already. We live in a time of fast changes anyway, driven by technology, but then also by political and economically uncertainties or changes. And all of this grabs a lot our attention. But I think, especially in the last few days in Germany, in Europe, I saw some people also checked in from outside Europe. But I think it's really all across the globe. We really feel that climate change is real, that it's not an exception, that we cannot talk about hot weather events, but really a change of climate. So there's this one key fact that the last 10 years were each time the warmest on record, so to say, not chronologically, but the whole decade was the warmest ever accounted, and that we already see that it's not just an isolated topic where we say, okay, climate change heats up the globe, but it directly also impacts other topics where we talk about planetary boundaries. So climate and biodiversity, for example, are very much connected. That's just one result, but for sure also the whole other ecosystems that are part of it. And as a result, we had the new study from PwC this year coming out, which states that already kind of half of the global GDP is connected and thereby at risk, being at risk from changes in nature and climate. So that means the clock is ticking. I don't want to have too much of a bummer, so to say, in the beginning, but I also always want to make clear why focusing on climate is so critical, and why it is also nowadays that really climate data is financial data, because it is data to not just measure your CO2 impact as a company, but really it shows also, or it's an indicator of risk that you are carrying in your business model and then also along the supply chain. As the not only the global gross domestic product can be shrinking with each degree global warming added by now, but also every and single own company and supply chain is right now affected. That's physically, but then also transitorically. So seeing how effectively are you adapting and how efficiently are you also using resources. And that's actually where I also want to come towards the positive news, which is whenever I think why we are so overwhelmed talking about climate is because it's on a global scale, it's huge, it's hard to grab it. Also on your company level, it always, specifically when we talk about scope 3, it's indirect emissions, it's the emissions from the supply chain. So we see it here on the right. For most companies, the so-called indirect scope 3 emissions from the supply chain make the biggest share, often 80%, 90%, sometimes even more. But then also the positive news behind it is that there are already tested best practices and solutions to decrease these emissions on also a positive balance sheet, so to say, because reducing these emissions that's here in the green area can come from lower cost then even lower per ton than $12 is here the result of BCG, but on average lower than $100. So that would be kind of lower than what you already pay on taxes. And the solutions not only impact your emissions, so help you to decrease emissions, but they are solutions like circularity, renewable energy, circular processes, and so on. So it can help you to really drive also efficiency terms, reduce costs, and thereby also the risk of not adapting quick enough to new business opportunities and also circumstances in the market. And like one big highlight that I always love to bring out, and I think that's not talked enough about, is that we are not on track to reach our climate targets, but we see that the big changes are already having an impact. So, for example, in the EU, we do see that the goal of 2030 is to reduce 55% compared to the 1990s, and we already reached 54%, and that's mainly due to the big usage of renewables. So last year we had more renewables being used than fossil fuels, and that in the end also creates an successful business models. So having a strong climate action plan worldwide and policies being implemented, there's a report then that we could even increase our global domestic product versus what we saw before, dramatic decreases. So having all of that in mind, that's what Josefa really showed is what the summit is all about. We want to really have it each time as a conversation that's with decision makers and leaders in that field who are responsible in their companies to not only think about how can I decarbonize my own company, but really how can I have an impact in the whole supply chain. So go into action in scope 3. And that's what we started last year already in person. Back then it was a one-day event and we had so many conversations and so many workshops that this year it was 2 days even. And what we do each time is we have it on purpose not recorded, so that we can really be all in a room and have honest conversations, and maybe what I would say, not just the marketing conversations that are sometimes out there, but really talk about who owns which kind of climate targets, what does it mean for your decision making, how do you monitor it, how do you get towards internal alignment, external alignment, and so on. And those were what you see now, 6 major challenges that we already last year identified and said, okay, when we really talk about supply chain decarbonization and coming towards decarbonization, why is it that we are not all doing it already, even though we can see it might reduce risk and cost, it might create new business models. And what we really had were like 3 main areas, so to say. So the first one is all about strategy, really coming from targets into actions, but also creating a business case around it to get the C-level on board. Then the second one is like, making the whole plan into action with your supply chain, so really engaging suppliers. And then the third one is also to have a data system behind it so that you can really track it and see results. And that's what we this year made then as a starting point. So we said, okay, we have 3 areas. We need a strong why, a strong strategy. Then we need to know what we are doing. So really having the goal to bringing sustainability and specifically climate measures, which is mainly often a CO2 number bracket. There's much more to look into as well. And then how is like really to have a strong data management. And yeah, so the intro is we are way over the point to talk about if we need climate action or if Scope 3 action specifically makes sense. But it's already, and that is for me also a highlight coming from one year to the other with customers and partners to see the whole conversation today is about the how. And there no one also needs to feel embarrassed or bad because they haven't figured it all out. We are all in there together. And we see it from small to big companies. Everyone struggles with that. But working together, we also find strong solutions. So that's what I love to share now, I would say in the next half an hour-ish together with Josefa. And those are just some essential learnings from the summit, because I think we had over 20 speakers and the whole day from keynotes to workshops to case studies. And I tried to pick those 3 topics that fit to the main challenges that we started with, even though there were more examples. And for all of these, we're gonna have also deep dives, webinars, where the speakers will then also introduce their topic in more detail. So each of them can fill like a whole webinar, which probably is happening in towards Q3 in September and following on. So stay tuned for that. But today I'm happy to dive into these 3 areas of the why, what, and how to integrate Scope 3 action in your supply chain. And that brings me to the first one. So this was introduced by Tabea, the principal expert in sustainability at Atruvia. And she shared with us how she's making Scope 3 a business in Atruvia. So not her alone, and I can also not speak directly for her, but then on a high level, bring the essence of what she shared. So what she said is that she joined a few years ago at Atruvia, and for sure the company had already set climate targets, and she highlighted quite ambitious ones. And then she came into her role, and the first big challenge, and I think that's what you all highlighted as well, was that she had the role then to operationalize. It's always a word that I have struggled with. Sustainability into procurement, because she actually created this graph here and said she figured out when she just works, so to say, and that's her role also is in sustainability and procurement. If she just focus on one or the other, she will always be confronted with conflicting priorities. And there's one thing in sustainability, often rather focusing on reporting, maybe being backwards oriented because you need to bring in the numbers. And then you have procurement, where you often find maybe more a forward-looking system because you need to source, you need to find new suppliers, you maybe need to go into supplier development and so on. So what her biggest topic was that she found out for building a strong Scope 3 strategy is that she needed to bring the theory into action in the whole company, and that the theory was already there. There was a time plan, there were targets, there were specific measures and hotspots. But her biggest topic was really to internally align sustainability and procurement, and to then externally also engage suppliers and bring them on into the climate journey. And what she said is that really this sustainable procurement strategy that she came up with, starting from the goal to creating an idea how to integrate suppliers, is really the foundation for everything else to get it into movement, so to say, or bring it forward. and that it therefore also needs data as a foundation to really bring in transparency. Where do we stand? How can we trace everything? How can we find preferred suppliers? How can we start a dialogue about gaps that are maybe existing, and so on. So that was her first action point, so to say, or one of the action points after building the strategy and figuring out what's actually so far the biggest bottleneck. So bringing all the different departments together and having one aligned strategy was also to really work on aligned data usage. And she came up with a word like data architecture, because for sure there was already a lot of data existing in the company, and she just named some tools that the company was using. And to say that there were information about sustainability data, about climate data, there was information about suppliers, there were different inputs from strategy and so on, different KPIs. But then she came towards building up internally a system, or that's what's going on right now, to really bring transparency into the supply chain and make it also for all different departments usable, so they can have an understanding of what's going on right now and building up that structure. So she finds herself right now in the moment to bring that forward. And I promise you, Zephyr, to make from time to time a pause. We can have a quick discussion on that. And that's where I would invite you towards now.
Thank you. Yeah, discussion, also maybe some time to reflect, because I mean, now we just heard how Truvia was very nicely tackling one of the most important, but then also, I guess, overlooked questions in Scope 3. I mean, we talked about the why, so why decarbonize, why now? And how do you actually embed also that strategy into the business? And this is also very nicely reflected. Remember when we did the poll in the beginning, where I think it was even 27% of the participants in this call said that how to bring carbon into procurement is one of their biggest current challenges. And what I found especially compelling, if you will, in the case study on Atruvia that you just shared, is how clearly they showed that Scope 3 success in the end also really starts with structure. So instead of jumping right into, I don't know, data collection or supplier outreach, they really laid this foundational architecture, as you also named it. So connecting, as we see now on this slide, the corporate ambition to the sustainability goals, but then also to procurement processes and supplier criteria. And what you always say, Lauren, I really love to quote you on this, is that you always say, share that you can't track progress if you don't, first structure your data, obviously, and your organization around what really matters. So from your perspective, Lara, what does it take for companies to really build that kind of, Scope 3 action architecture? And how do you avoid this trap of creating a strategy that is then actually potentially even too abstract to act upon?
Yeah, I think that is really a good example then here what Tabea shared, because I think it's what we hear from most companies really is that within the last 5 to 10 years, maybe the whole topic of climate gained tremendously in importance. So it became an own topic in the sustainability team, and it very often I think there are two approaches. Some companies started with very strong goals and really wanted to lead from there, and then said, okay, we're going to first set a target that our leadership can agree with, and then we're going to build from there what we need to do. And I think that's what we see with many companies, that they actually took this approach. Others have been sharing, okay, they didn't commit to targets and they said, we just want to commit at that point where we are. And they maybe have very short-term actions that they described and really want to come towards that. But I think in both cases is often focused on this one number of how many emissions do I have right now and how much do I want to cut that down. And that is really like a, so to say, work on paper. So it is very theoretically what you said, right? Because no one exactly know how it's going to play out. Plus, that forced most companies to really go into specific CO2 calculation over and over again. Most companies find out that most of the emissions come from the supply chain, and then they figure, okay, it has 15 different categories, and the first one is product services bought in, and for it depends on the business model, but it for most companies that has a major part in their supply chain emissions. And then they see, okay, that leads me to the suppliers. So these emissions cannot be managed without my suppliers being engaged. And that's quite a learning journey that I think takes often, like, yeah, I would say have seen everything from 1 year to 5 years to say, okay, we have targets now, big achievement, everyone commits on it, or we have something we want to go towards. We have maybe communicated something, we did our homework, we do the calculation, we did it again and again, maybe on average data. But then we see, okay, if we now want to change something and not just commit and report every year the same emissions, and maybe we even have seen them growing in the past, then we need to take the next steps, which is often a little bit annoying and complicating, to really find out which of my suppliers have the most emission, who of those suppliers are best prepared and have a good climate maturity, who has already own climate targets and takes maybe some actions, and who of my suppliers I'm buying a lot of emissions from, but they actually lag behind. And if I want to bring my emissions down, I have to work with them. So this learning curve then, or development curve, I think we all go through it, really then leads from being a sustainability-driven topic towards a procurement-driven topic. And then in the end, the moment you engage your suppliers and maybe want to take changes, it really becomes a whole company strategy, because then you have topics like, do we want to change our product? Do we need to change processes? Do we might want to open up a whole new business model? And that's really latest point, I would say, where the whole company is engaged.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think, I mean, what you laid out is that once you have this foundation in place, I mean, then this is where you come into, yeah, where's the biggest bang for the buck, basically, also driving, yeah, emission reduction really with your partners. But what we also often hear, right, I think when we talk with the variant ecosystem partners that we have is once the like why and the foundation is laid, then the what becomes very evident, right? So, I mean, what kind of carbon criteria should also come up in procurement decisions? I mean, you also very nicely said right now, okay, let's, rather look at future oriented criteria. For example, are targets set? Is there a transition plan in place? So not only looking at current emissions, but then also one of the biggest questions that we always get in also, okay, so what suppliers do we actually need to engage on this topic? So is it just our first top 10 first tier suppliers? How do we potentially then also get the data in order to engage our suppliers that potentially make up the lowest share of our spend? And I think that you brought a very nice case study here from Zeiss in order to give us some more insights on that, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I love to go into that. So yeah, as pointed out, right, the strategy brings you towards, so the Scope 3 action strategy brings you towards working strongly with your procurement. And often companies, see that the people in procurement have already strong. I mean, that has been often since decades there a very strong KPI-driven system where you mainly look in quality, delivery, price for suppliers. But now you need to bring in new metrics around sustainability. Often one of the most direct measures is the CO2. So from understanding the impact from the product or from the supplier itself, and then from there creating your own KPI set. And in the case from Carl Zeiss, what Stefan and Katja shared is, Stefan has the luxury, so to say, to work since, I think, more than 20 years in the supply chain management, and for sure then also really knows the system very well. And what he shared is really that he needs to make it as easy as possible to have an understanding on the whole supply chain, so that it does not become a pet project for only a few selected suppliers, but really drive through KPI and data management a holistic change, that this is then combined with the sustainability team really driving decarbonization. And what he shared, and again, that's a summary of what he was sharing, and happy to have him invited as a webinar speaker soonish to go more in details. But he basically shared that as usual, or some business models also might be different, that you really have just a few suppliers, but in their case, it's really that they have a huge supplier base, speaking about hundreds and thousands of suppliers that make up their emissions in Scope 3. Luckily, they have a few that really are the ones that create the most emissions, and they have been working with them already in the past and collected data. But they had like different challenges now, which is mainly how to address that large number of the long tail suppliers, so to say. So not just a few ones where you can pick up the phone and really call them and maybe ask for, so to say, manual processes to send information via email and Excel and so on, but really how to find a system that allows you to track the same numbers that you get from these hotspot suppliers for the long tail, so that you have like one comparable KPI that you can really integrate then in your procurement systems. And in their case, they focused on the emission factor, so really the emissions from the suppliers, and then multiply them with the spend that you have on a certain supplier, so that you have an understanding how many emissions you buy in per supplier. But then also, that's I think a very good way to communicate in procurement, which Stefan pointed out. For him, he mainly said the emission factor is also a key measure for efficiency, because it often shows that suppliers that are in the same area, maybe same category, have different emissions. And when you look into it, then the ones that have lower emissions, they might already have switched to renewable energy. They might already change processes, focused on low carbon transportation and so on. So he said, okay, I really also want to find out who of my suppliers are the smartest one, the most innovative ones, and the one that also can share data already. So they also show that they are not only part of this climate transformation, but also the digital transformation, and that it is really for him an indicator of finding very strong leading suppliers that are adapting to the challenges that are out there. Is it data transparency, or is it sustainability and resource efficiency? So what he was looking for is to find an approach for this long tail, to like bring the KPI set, and specifically first the emission factor, that he already integrated for the top suppliers in a very low effort way for the long tail as well. And also come away from manually collecting data. And what he was sharing is what he came up with, and happy to have him then share the nice overview because it looks really good, is that he basically with his team created like an own, what he called, emission dashboard in procurement. So that's where you have the blue placeholder here for a very nice dashboard he was sharing at the conference, to say, okay, his goal was that in every single step of the procurement cycle, so from phasing in and selecting suppliers to supplier development, where you maybe have yearly or quarterly feedback calls, to supplier evaluation and so on, phase out, that each of these phases, different people are often working with the suppliers, but they all should have a very clear idea of what's the spend on those suppliers, in which category is it working. So the typical, I would say, internal data that's already there, but then also, what is the specific emission factor for them, and how much euro or spend is at risk because of this climate impact. So he had an own system multiplying the emissions by carbon taxes, and thereby coming up with a risk measurement itself. So that's something he can go more into. But what was missing was really, okay, he had already all this internal data, but then he missed also the external data about, what is the financial information of the suppliers, or what's their revenue, turnover, and so on. And then to use that in combination with emissions of the supplier to come up with a specific emission factor. And in this case, we were happy to work together and really use our platform driven by AI to use standardized data pipeline, searching always for the same informations. It's not only the financial and the emission data, has up to 300 data points, but in this case, focusing very much on specific keywords. and then bringing that in and feeding it directly in the procurement system so that the data is not locked on our platform in this case, or in the case before maybe, or what we see in other companies in Excel files, but really feeding it in into the existing procurement system that then had an own emission dashboard, where now everyone being in the process can have a look and use it for the different cases of selection or supplier development. And that's now where he is using the information in the team to build these outcomes of and more specific carbon accounting, but that's not his driver, so to say. That's what he can now play to the sustainability team and make them happy. But also, and that's what he always highlighted, and I think that's what, again, is our whole mission about, and specifically the summit as well, is to come towards real decarbonization actions. So just a moment, you understand where the suppliers are standing, which emissions they have, and what you're buying in. You can then take new procurement decisions or align with the suppliers how these emissions can go down, create forecast, and really have a transition planning that focuses on emission reduction. And with that, Josefa, do you have any questions on that?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I mean, I already loved the presentation actually at the Climate Transformation Summit, because I think this is such a cool and powerful example of how you can really make then also emissions as tangible and actionable at usually procurement used to use price, quality, and lead time. Because what they really did here, and what we see exactly on the slide, is that they're not just looking at carbon accounting, right, as a reporting task, but I mean, with this emission dashboard for procurement, they also managed to directly use the data for various data use cases that you're having here on the right-hand side. And you also managed to say in the beginning how they went away from just focusing on the most important, but then also to the tail end suppliers. And Lara, I would really love to get to know from you after years of your experience in this field. So how can companies scale qualitative, and I think this is a very important word here, primary supplier data collection to drive climate smart procurement decisions without overwhelming neither themselves or their suppliers? What is it that you're seeing here as trends in the market?
Yeah, I think that's really also the problem we had here. So to say, okay, with a few suppliers where maybe some companies are in that setup that they luckily have to the top 20, 30, 50 suppliers, maybe a very strong relationship, and they can really also go in this discussion saying, hey, I need more information from you. Can you do that? Can you send me something over, and so on. But then if you have hundreds and thousands of suppliers, it's very tricky. A, it's manual work, you cannot do it. And then B, also you maybe not necessarily have each time the right contact person, like in the procurement systems often is maybe the key account, or emails might even be info at or whatever. So even if you dare, so to say, to reach out to your suppliers and come with new requirements to fulfill your own information need, you might not end up with high quality data, because either suppliers just not answer, you have the wrong contact, they are overwhelmed, or the data you get back is insufficient. Everyone, I think, has had these emails with just a number being written down, or like a 200-page report with an in-detail calculation, and you're not sure, both variation, how to apply it and find like the right standard to bring it really into a way that you can use it. And I think the one example I always give, even if they send the right numbers and the one person is using the English version, and for us the German version with numbers, a dot or a comma can change everything, and then your whole calculation is already wrong and you need to figure out where the problem was. So quality is quite an issue. And then also, really the answer rate and the context to suppliers, it's maybe not manageable with like hundreds and thousands of suppliers. So in our case, we really work with the platform in first using AI. So we all have seen the tremendous development in the last few years. I think everyone already uses ChatGPT on a daily basis, but where it's really useful and where we see a high impact on it is to use it to prompt very high quality data search and collection. So not everyone needs to go to the same databases, websites, sustainability reports, and so on. But yeah, you can use an AI for it. And as said, we search up to 300 data points per supplier on average. And yeah, from there, then use it to also not only find the information, but to check, again, AI-driven, what the quality of this information is. So to kind of give a transparency rating on where's the information coming from. Is it trustworthy? So is it maybe certified? Does it fulfill any standard like greenhouse gas protocol and so on, ISO norms? Was it maybe certified again? Do you find proof points for that? And then give you like data in a format that's almost already audit ready. So you most often have to integrate it then in the systems you're using, and then most often it's used by auditors or internal teams to bring it really in the standards that you can directly use it for your reporting as well.
Yeah, and again, I think, right, I mean, here it's about, yeah, decreasing, so to say, the point of friction where you're asking for just too much data and in the end, nobody knows how to handle it, but really looking first, a little bit like linking back to the structural system of Atruvia, what is really moving the needle for you to drive decision making so that you then also ask the right questions via the most easy way to your suppliers to get this overview. Yeah, thank you so much. And I think, I mean, now let's maybe move also from the what to the how, right? So from the integration to execution, because I guess what we now understood, and again, right, linking back to the full poll that you did in the beginning, how to integrate carbon into procurement, so into part of your usual systems of processes is, I guess, one of the key drivers, and also one of the key challenges. Yet, I think that once this is, so to say, said, one of the other challenges really becomes how do you actually get all the data to fill it, especially when you're working, as for example, then also sites with hundreds of thousands of suppliers. But then also, if you want to get more and more specific, not only on a supplier basis, but potentially also product carbon footprint data, etc. So yeah, super happy to yeah now listen into these two use cases from TeamViewer and O2 Telefónica Germany.
Yeah, so I love how you build up the whole journey. So that's really what I also wanted to share, right? This why is it needs to climate action, scope 3 action needs to be really across a whole company and then specifically driven by sustainability and procurement department. It cannot be done isolated, and then it needs really a set of KPIs to understand how do I measure the climate performance and maturity of my suppliers, and then make it also the work of not only the sustainability team, but also the procurement team to get that information. And then it's really about how do you get that information? So that's a how. And again, if you don't just want to send out emails and yeah, Excel files, it is a topic about yeah, scaling the process, but also focusing on quality and standards so you can really use it in your own systems. And what we had at the summit was two different case studies. So one with TeamViewer focusing more on the CCFs, and then with O2 Telefonica focusing on TCFs. So I will shortly introduce to those. So with TeamViewer, they really already did a good job of yeah, calculating the emissions year after year. And that it was kind of the journey that I introduced in the beginning. Many companies are facing right now. If you are already, I would say, a pro in scope 3 calculation, and you have already really good data there and maybe repeatedly did it over a few years, you easily find that, yeah, you will not get specific information or specifically also reduction information if you don't have the information from your own supply chain, but work with average data, because those will mainly stay the same if it's not maybe changes due to yeah, energy usage in different countries and so on. So what they were looking for was specific emission data from their suppliers, and they wanted to have a realistic understanding of their own supply chain, so moving away from average data. And what they wanted to use it for is yeah, the regulatory requirements and looking forward to CSRD in whichever form it's coming. But then really also use it for their own decarbonization strategy for all the arguments being said before. So also, yeah, dealing with risk, being well prepared and being a leader in the field. And what action they took was really to look into the emission calculation that they did already based on average data, identified hotspots, and then used the materiality analysis to really also say which suppliers are relevant. So not taking all of the suppliers, but then starting with one set. In their case, it was service providers. And then using again our platform and specifically the AI tool to really search for the emissions and financial data on scale. But then also here in this case, it was very much because one of the big drivers was also to get the scope 3 calculation correct and use it for audit ready information. So you could also use it in reporting, looking forward to CSRD and so on. It was also about finding high quality data that really has this proof point. And again, there, like with AI, that's a nice thing about it. You don't need to have someone having an Excel file, putting each time the URL to the sustainability report in or the science-based targets database, CDP, or whatever you found the information in. But like really have it collected with each information point you are searching for, and then also having a rating or an indication. For us, it's a 0 to 1 indication if this data point is trustworthy or not. So where is it coming from? Is it a credible source? Do you already have like proof points on it that it's good information? So that they could just extract in the end the information. And they work together with 5Glacier as a consultancy to really like user extract the data, which was already in a standardized format, but to really go out and use it in their own reporting process. And then they handed in the whole information. And it was in this preparation for CSRD reviewed from TÜV Süd and then certified and allowed into their scope 3 calculation. And what they said as a main result is not only that they're really on a again, such a word, on a I cannot say it, on a methodisches level, whatever.
Methodology? No, I'm not
Perfect.
helping.
I'm not helping either. That's the German trying to speak English on my side. So on a theoretical level, they even had a reduction, but for sure that is like based on more correct data. But that was one goal of them to like really have a realistic understanding. Are the emissions actually so high? Are they different from different suppliers? So there they could already see that the emissions are lower than what they calculated with. But then also what they said is per suppliers, as they looked in this one category of service suppliers, they really already had now a data-driven approach for benchmarking, and also from there to go into the next steps, which will come now, which is like a clear reduction path and target on specific supplier goals. And I would quickly also do the second case. Yes, okay. So the second case was here not only focusing on corporate carbon footprint data, but on product carbon footprint data, which I think, and that's why it's a highlight of the end of the webinar, is really the holy grail in sustainability procurement. So I think everyone nowadays is talking about it. We would love to have to manage really our decarbonization journey efficiently. We love to have the product carbon footprint data of our suppliers. But it tend to be even more complex in the corporate carbon footprint, not only because it's an intensive calculation. So to really do the whole life cycle assessment for each product and to find like also a standard again, where you can measure against if this calculation was done in a high quality way or not. But also because we see it in the market, when I would give like a gut feeling, maybe 50% of companies have yet their corporate carbon footprint done, which is mainly based on the energy usage in their own company and like in their direct emissions and in that area. But that's already a challenge. And then going a step further to the product carbon footprint, having said that, maybe 10-20% depends on how big the companies are. They have done that step. So it's not only a question how good the data is that you are checking, which is often for the CCF the case, but here also Scott pointed out that it was the first challenge, even what they already worked on, because they are longer already in that field, is the first task is really checking the availability, because you cannot yet assume that all their suppliers have a product carbon footprint. And then the second step is to check it on quality, if you get data, and then also in the right format, because the whole frameworks are just developing. So in that case, also we work together to set up a proof of concept to build up a scalable system. So again, focusing on integrating our data into their systems, which is then really to find a standardized way of using AI to search exactly the data they are looking for in a standard they are looking for. In this case, we worked with a pact standard and really see not only collecting the information, but when you get it, the product carbon footprint, to really understand in 5 dimensions how high the quality is, and give again each product like a score of a product carbon footprint, a score of how valid the information is that you are getting. And I was a little bit quick now because I looked to the time and I'm good in talking. So, Steffa, I hand over to you.
Yeah, and I mean, there were also questions on the chat, but we promise you to answer them also after the call. Because what I would really like to look at with you right now, Lara, is you mentioned, right, that the 2 last cases, they were already pretty advanced when it comes to their maturity level. But for companies just getting started and still having the same ambition to get there at one point in time. I know that you are also a big fan of peer learning. So I would love to hear from you also. How can peer learning, exchange, and joint learning journeys actually help in order to drive, yeah, really the ambition to move from a scope 3 target setting into action forward?
Yeah, so I, as already teasered here, I would highly invite you to the next choice event. So coming up from autumn onwards, we will have one in 2 weeks still, but then there will be a small summer break, and we are happy to invite those speakers to share their own journeys and go deeper. But then what we also have, and what many or most speakers that we have just here today were joining also, is our Scope 3 Action Group, because we have started it 2 years ago with the summit, the first one in person. That we had each time the same conversation, that decision makers, sustainability, procurement leaders each time told us it's really one thing to come to that how of data collection, usage, integration, but the whole other point is to create up that strong why in the company, get a strategy, get the budget, get everyone on board. Maybe upskill procurement, maybe learn more from the sustainability team how procurement is actually working, find a shared learning, and pilot journey maybe, or accelerate what's already there to bring really these climate targets into actions as a shared journey in sustainability and procurement, and then implement it in a way of collecting data from your suppliers and also working together with your suppliers on decarbonization action, where we all really want to come towards. And that's what we now did since 2 years in the Scope 3 Action Group. We successfully, I think last week, closed the 4th cohort. So we each time have now a 4 months journey where we go through these 3 modules. First is like understanding where your company stand, benchmark within the group, understand which kind of data is already used internally. That's all anonymously between the participants, but often we get to a very trustful conversation in the end anyway. Everyone is sharing, and we have signed NDAs with each other. And then from there, move towards, okay, what are your goals? What are the data frameworks you're using or systems you're having right now? And then go from, okay, which information do you need from your suppliers to improve it? Which data do you have already? Is it maybe that you start with a small pilot to reach out suppliers, or do you really want to scale to the hundreds and thousands of suppliers? And then collecting the data. And that's then really where the magic happens, so to say, going into module 3, where we use our Scope 3 master plan, which is like a strategic tool set where you really, in the end, build a whole roadmap that you're not only presenting within the group and get like feedback on it, but really use it then also internally to present the whole thing. And ideally, really get budget for your next 12 months journey and have it already set up to have a strong business case and also in strategy within your whole company to really move towards action. And as I said, we have just closed the 4th group, and the next one going to start in September. And I assume you're going to find all information easily on theclimatechoice.com. or you can directly reach out to us and apply to join the next group.
Yeah, and also, I mean, we've got a dedicated webinar session actually coming up, a choice event within 2 weeks' time. So together with Tabea from Atruvia, so you saw her case study today, but then also Christina from Nordics. So the two of them will share how they kicked off their own, very individual journeys of Scope 3 action in their companies. And yeah, thank you so much, Lara. I was really listening in again and thought, that's nice. Some things, I mean, I remembered, but then it's also quite cool to, get this very beautiful wrap up. So thanks a lot for bringing all of that up. We will, of course, as always, shared in a blog, also on our webpage. And there's so many more events of us coming up. So please stay tuned. We have a shot SATO to Telefónica Germany upcoming with the speakers, then also from the companies. So we'd love to see you there again. And everything will be shared in the follow-up to the session. So thanks so much. And a very, at least in Berlin now, still cloudy afternoon, but I think the sun is getting out. So thanks and see you next time.
Thanks, Josefa, and thanks everyone in the call, and yeah, for making Scope 3 action happen. See you
Thank you.
soon.
Bye.